of the world didn't have it until colonization started in the 15th century.
And it's the one blood type that is least likely to mutate or interact with other blood types.
What if the key to unlocking one of humanity's oldest mysteries was hiding in your veins? For centuries, scientists have been baffled by the strange dominance of type O blood among indigenous peoples of the Americas. How did it become so widespread, and why?
Regeneration is to get a little bit further back from what was taken. And right now, of course, it's our language and culture and our history being taught in a school.
The answers, once buried in ancient migrations and genetic secrets, are finally coming to light. In this video, we'll uncover the breakthrough that reshapes what we know about human history, survival, and the hidden power of blood. This isn't just about science, it's about identity, resilience, and a story thousands of years in the making. Blood is divided into four main types: A, B, and O. These are defined by the presence or absence of certain molecules known as antigens on the surface of red blood cells. People with type A have A antigens, type B have B antigens, AB has both, and type O has neither. It's this absence of antigens that makes type O so important in medicine. It's less likely to cause a reaction when used in transfusions, which is why it's known as the universal donor. But while most people know type O for its medical usefulness, its origins and global distribution tell an even more fascinating story. Globally, around 45% of people have type O blood, though that number can vary quite a bit depending on the region. In some European countries, for instance, it might be closer to 40%, while in parts of Africa, the percentage can be significantly higher. However, in many indigenous communities throughout North, Central, and South America, the proportion of type O blood is unusually high, sometimes reaching as much as 100% in isolated groups. That level of concentration is extremely rare in biology. In most populations, blood types are fairly mixed due to generations of inbreeding, migration, and genetic drift. So how did type O become so dominant in these regions? That question has driven research for decades and opened up a number of theories, some of which are still debated today. One of the earliest and most widely accepted explanations is rooted in migration history. During the last ice age, roughly 15,000 to 20,000 years ago, small groups of humans are believed to have migrated from what is now Siberia into North America, likely crossing a land bridge known as Beringia that once connected the two regions. These early travelers brought with them not just tools and survival skills, but also a limited set of genetic traits, one of which may have been a high frequency of the gene responsible for type O blood. Over time, as these populations settled across the Americas and became increasingly isolated from the rest of the world, their gene pools remained relatively untouched. Without new blood types being introduced through interbreeding with other groups and without much mixing over thousands of years, the traits they carried, including type O blood, became more concentrated. In a way, isolation acted like a genetic amplifier, increasing the presence of the O blood type in future generations. But isolation alone doesn't fully explain the story. Scientists also believe that natural selection may have played a role. Some research suggests that individuals with type O blood might have had a slight advantage in terms of disease resistance. For example, people with O blood may be less likely to suffer from severe malaria or certain bacterial infections. While malaria wasn't widespread in pre-Columbian America, other infectious diseases certainly existed, and it's possible that type O blood offered protection against them. Even a small survival advantage can have a big impact over many generations. There's also the fact that type O blood is more genetically stable than the other types. It tends to resist mutation and is less likely to blend with other types when populations mix. This characteristic, combined with centuries of isolation and possible environmental pressures, may have helped solidify its dominance in indigenous American populations. Another piece of the puzzle comes from the study of blood type distribution around the world. When researchers map where different blood types are most common, they see distinct patterns. In Europe, for instance, type A is dominant in the West and North, while type B appears more frequently in Central and South Asia. These differences are thought to reflect long-term adaptation to various environments, diets, and population movements. In Africa, where humans are believed to have first evolved, type O is also very common, supporting the idea that it may be one of the oldest blood types. But nowhere is the concentration of type O blood as consistent and high as it is among indigenous groups in the Americas. From the forests of the Amazon to the plains of North America, many communities show a near-total dominance of this type. That pattern is so unusual that it has prompted some researchers to describe it as a kind of biological time capsule, preserving a genetic trait from the distant past in a remarkably pure form. This raises another important question. Was the spread of type O blood in the Americas purely a matter of chance and isolation? Or were there specific environmental or social factors that reinforced it? While there is no definitive answer yet, a number of theories suggest that it may have helped early humans adapt to the unique challenges of the continents. For instance, in high-altitude regions like the Andes, where oxygen levels are lower, people with type O blood might have had better oxygen delivery throughout their bodies. While the evidence is still being studied, some researchers think that blood with fewer antigens may move more efficiently, which could offer a slight edge in such environments. If true, even a small difference in survival or fertility rates could have a significant long-term effect. Social structure and cultural practices may have played a part as well. In small, tightly knit communities where cooperation and survival were deeply linked, people with type O blood may have been seen as valuable in medical emergencies, especially childbirth. Because they can donate blood to anyone, individuals with this type might have been called upon more often, indirectly raising their status or likelihood of reproduction. Though speculative, these ideas show how biology and culture can influence one another in subtle but powerful ways. Despite these theories, researchers still face challenges in fully understanding how type O blood became so widespread in the Americas. The genetic pathways that determine blood type are complex, and many questions remain about how different versions of the gene, known as alleles, evolved and spread over time. Until recently, some parts of the ABO gene cluster remained poorly understood, limiting scientists' ability to trace its evolution accurately. That's starting to change thanks to advancements in genetic sequencing. In the last 2 decades, researchers have begun identifying more specific variations within the ABO gene that help explain how and why type O developed and spread the way it did. By comparing ancient DNA samples with modern populations, scientists are gradually building a clearer picture of human migration, adaptation, and biological history. What's clear so far is that blood types, though often treated as a simple medical label, are far more than that. They are deep markers of human ancestry, shaped by migration, isolation, survival, and even chance. And in the case of type O blood, they may hold some of the oldest secrets in our genetic history, secrets that are only now coming to light. The idea that blood types could hold clues about human survival and migration may seem surprising at first. After all, blood type isn't something we can see or even feel in our daily lives. But when scientists started mapping how different types are spread across the world, they noticed patterns that couldn't be explained by chance alone. Among these, the dominance of type O blood in the indigenous peoples of the Americas stood out as one of the clearest and most mysterious examples. The fact that some indigenous communities in North and South America have type O frequencies close to 100% isn't just unusual. It's practically unheard of in human biology. In comparison, the global average for type O sits around 45 to 60% depending on the region. For a single blood type to be that dominant across entire populations, from the Arctic Circle to the Amazon rainforest, suggests something deeper is at play, something that goes beyond simple inheritance. One theory that helps explain this widespread pattern involves survival. In evolutionary terms, survival doesn't just mean staying alive. It means living long enough to reproduce and pass on your genes. If people with type O blood had even a slight advantage in certain environments, whether that's resisting infections, adapting to high altitudes, or handling extreme weather, that small edge could grow stronger over generations. Researchers have looked into how blood type might affect resistance to disease. For example, it's been shown that people with type O blood may have a lower risk of severe malaria. Malaria isn't a major concern in most parts of the Americas, especially in colder climates, but the general idea still holds. If O blood provides better defense against certain illnesses, perhaps viral or bacterial infections common in the pre-Columbian Americas, it could explain why individuals with this type were more likely to survive and have children. Environmental pressure plays a role as well. Imagine living in a high-altitude region like the Andes. Oxygen levels there are significantly lower than at sea level, and the body needs to work harder to function. Some studies have suggested that type O blood, which lacks the antigens found in other types, may allow blood to flow more freely and deliver oxygen more efficiently. If that's true, it would offer a direct survival benefit in mountainous areas. Even a slight improvement in oxygen delivery could reduce fatigue, improve endurance, or help in childbirth. All factors that could influence survival and reproduction over generations. These benefits might seem small in the short term, but over hundreds or thousands of years, they could have a major effect on the gene pool. In evolutionary biology, these are known as selective pressures. They're not always dramatic or immediately obvious, but they shape populations in powerful ways. The more favorable a trait becomes, the more likely it is to spread. And that's exactly what seems to have happened with type O blood in the Americas. Geography also had a major influence. After the initial human migration from Siberia into North America, likely across the Bering Land Bridge during the last ice age, those early groups became isolated. Over time, as they spread through the Americas and settled in different regions, they had little to no contact with outside populations. This isolation meant that the gene pool remained relatively stable, especially in remote areas. When a population remains isolated for many generations, genetic drift can cause certain traits to become more common just by chance. But when you combine this with natural selection, where specific traits offer survival advantages, you get an even stronger effect. In the case of type O blood, both factors seem to have worked together. Isolation kept new blood types from entering, and environmental challenges may have favored those with type O. Interestingly, the story of blood types around the world mirrors the movements of early humans. In Africa, where modern humans are believed to have first evolved, type O is quite common. As people migrated into Europe and Asia, the frequencies of types A and B began to rise. Type A became dominant in much of Western Europe, while type B is more common in Central and Eastern Asia. These shifts are thought to reflect a mix of genetic drift, adaptation to new diets and climates, and possibly even social changes that influenced reproduction. By the time humans reached the Americas, their genetic makeup was already shaped by thousands of years of movement and adaptation. But the final stretch of their journey, across the Bering Land Bridge and into an entirely new continent, appears to have set the stage for something unique. The gene for type O blood, possibly already common among those early travelers, became locked in and amplified over time. This pattern isn't only found in the Americas. Other remote populations, like those on some Pacific islands, also show unusual blood type distributions, often shaped by a similar mix of isolation and selection. However, the dominance of type O blood in the Americas remains unmatched. No other region shows such high levels of a single blood type across such a wide and diverse range of environments. That diversity is worth noting. From the Arctic tundra to tropical jungles, indigenous peoples in the Americas adapted to vastly different climates and conditions. Yet across these very different lifestyles and geographies, type O blood remained the most common. This consistency hints at the possibility that type O wasn't just a neutral trait. It may have been actively helpful in different ways, depending on the environment. Some researchers have proposed that diet could be part of the equation. Traditional indigenous diets in the Americas were incredibly varied. In the far north, people relied heavily on fish and meat. In the Central Plains, hunting large animals like bison was common. In the south, agriculture and plant-based diets were more prominent. Even with these differences, there's speculation that type O blood might handle protein and fat-rich diets more efficiently. This idea, while still debated, adds another layer to the possible reasons why type O thrived. There are also social aspects to consider. In small, isolated communities, traits that offer even modest advantages can become more valued. If people with type O blood were more useful in emergencies, because their blood could be given to anyone, that could have led to subtle but lasting shifts in how they were perceived. Maybe they were seen as healthier, more helpful, or just more likely to survive. These social dynamics, even if unspoken, could have affected family and group formation in ways that reinforced the blood type's presence over time. The link between genetics and migration becomes even clearer when you look at specific regions tied to human history. One such place is Lake Baikal in Siberia. This lake is one of the oldest and deepest in the world, and it has long been a hub of human activity. Archaeological evidence shows that people lived near its shores as far back as 500,000 years ago. Some researchers believe that groups from this region may have been among the ancestors of modern Native Americans. If that's the case, it adds another piece to the puzzle. The gene for type O blood may have been present in these ancient Siberian populations, who then carried it with them into the Americas. Over time, with no significant mixing and possible advantages in health and survival, that gene became even more widespread. There's also growing evidence that the Americas weren't as isolated as once thought. Recent studies have shown that Native American and Polynesian populations may have had contact hundreds of years before Europeans arrived. Shared genetic markers suggest that some level of interbreeding occurred, possibly through long-distance sea travel. While this contact likely had a limited impact on blood type distribution, it does challenge the idea that indigenous groups were completely cut off from the rest of the world. Still, the broader pattern holds. Type O blood became the dominant trait in the Americas due to a combination of genetic, environmental, and social factors. No single reason can fully explain it, but taken together, the pieces form a compelling narrative. From the earliest migrations to the challenges of life in new and often harsh environments, this one blood type quietly became a marker of survival and adaptation. Type O blood, long known for its medical importance, is increasingly being studied not just as a life-saving resource in hospitals, but as a key to understanding human history. The same biological trait that makes someone a universal donor can also offer clues about their ancestral roots. For indigenous communities in the Americas, this connection has taken on a much deeper meaning. In the 1980s, researchers in the United States began studying the distribution of blood types across Native American populations. The findings were striking. In some communities, particularly those that had remained isolated over generations, nearly 99% of people had type O blood. This wasn't just a statistical curiosity. It became a starting point for questions about migration, isolation, and adaptation. How could a single trait be so dominant across such a large and diverse group of people? As genetic analysis became more precise, scientists were able to trace these patterns further. DNA studies confirmed what many indigenous people already knew through stories passed down across generations, that their ancestors had deep, unbroken connections to the land and to each other. These connections weren't just symbolic, they were embedded in their biology. Blood, in this sense, became both a metaphor and a literal marker of shared identity. One of the most powerful examples of this connection comes from the family of Sitting Bull, the famous Lakota leader. Using a small strand of hair preserved for over a century, researchers were able to confirm the genetic link between Sitting Bull and a living descendant. It was the first time DNA had been used to verify such a connection in Native American history. But the discovery was more than just scientific. It carried emotional and cultural weight. For the family involved, it was a moment of recognition and affirmation. For the wider community, it was a reminder of how modern science can support, rather than replace, traditional knowledge. Stories like this highlight the potential of genetic research to bridge gaps left by history. Many indigenous communities were deeply affected by colonization, forced relocations, and cultural erasure. In some cases, entire lineages were broken, and connections to ancestral lands and traditions were lost or questioned. DNA testing has become a way for some people to reconnect with those roots, to learn where their families came from, and to reclaim pieces of identity that were taken from them. But this new tool also comes with challenges. Not everyone welcomes the idea of using DNA to define cultural or tribal identity. Many indigenous leaders and scholars have pointed out that being Native is not just about genetics. It's about community, language, ceremony, and shared experience. Someone may carry a particular genetic marker, but have no lived connection to the people, traditions, or history of a tribe. In that context, claiming indigenous identity based solely on DNA results can be seen as superficial or even disrespectful. This tension becomes even more complicated when you consider how DNA testing has become part of a booming commercial industry. Ancestry kits are now widely available, and millions of people have used them to learn more about their heritage. While many of these services are genuinely helpful, they also raise serious questions. Who owns the data? How is it stored? Are the communities whose histories are being examined involved in the process? In some cases, the answer is no. There's growing concern that companies profiting from genetic data may not be giving enough thought or respect to the people behind that data. For Indigenous communities, this concern is especially pressing. Many have experienced centuries of exploitation, from land theft to the extraction of cultural artifacts and sacred objects. If DNA testing is going to be used to study or verify native ancestry, it needs to be done with care, consent, and collaboration. Another concern is that focusing too much on genetics can reduce culture to a set of biological facts. Identity is not something that can always be measured by a test tube or a computer. For Indigenous peoples, culture is living and dynamic. It's passed from one generation to the next through stories, songs, ceremonies, and daily life. While DNA can offer new insights, it can't replace that lived experience. At the same time, when handled ethically and with community involvement, genetic research can offer real benefits. In some regions, DNA testing has helped individuals reconnect with long-lost relatives, confirm oral histories, or even gain access to rights and resources they were previously denied. For people who were adopted or separated from their families, DNA has provided a path home. In certain legal and social contexts, documented Indigenous ancestry can influence access to healthcare, education, and recognition. Tribal affiliation can sometimes depend on documented lineage, especially in regions where treaties and government agreements are involved. In these cases, genetic evidence can support individuals in gaining access to services or joining communities they have historical links to. One example that drew attention in recent years was Leo Lapointe, a man whose DNA results confirmed a direct link to Sitting Bull. His story became a symbol of how modern science could support long-standing family beliefs. But it also reminded people of the emotional power behind these discoveries. For Leo, it wasn't just about being related to a historic figure. It was about being seen, acknowledged, and connected to a legacy that mattered. Still, as these tools become more common, there's a need for thoughtful conversation around their use. Who gets to tell these stories? Who benefits from the results? And how do we ensure that Indigenous communities have control over their own narratives? Privacy is another issue that often goes overlooked. When someone sends off a sample to a genetic testing company, they may not fully understand how their data will be used. Some companies partner with research institutions, others with pharmaceutical firms. In some cases, data from Indigenous individuals has been used in studies without proper consent, raising ethical questions about ownership and transparency. The conversation around DNA and identity is still evolving. Some tribes are creating their own protocols for genetic research, ensuring that any work involving their members is guided by cultural values and informed consent. Others are working with researchers to build projects that not only explore genetic history, but also preserve languages and traditions. Ultimately, the relationship between DNA and identity is complex. For some, a genetic test is a doorway to discovery. For others, it's an incomplete or even misleading picture. The key is recognizing that identity is shaped by more than just genes. It's shaped by the communities we belong to, the traditions we keep, and the histories we honor. Type O blood as a genetic marker is just one part of this broader picture. Its presence across so many Indigenous communities speaks to a shared past. But how that past is understood and respected depends on how we choose to tell the story. As DNA technology continues to advance, it offers incredible opportunities for learning and connection. But it also demands responsibility. If we want to use these tools in a way that honors the people behind the science, we need to listen carefully, respect boundaries, and put ethics at the center of research. In the end, genetics can be a powerful ally in the search for identity. But it's not the whole answer. It can confirm connections, raise new questions, and inspire deeper exploration. But it cannot replace the human experience, the stories, relationships, and cultural ties that make each identity unique. For Indigenous peoples in the Americas and around the world, the hope is that DNA research can serve as a complement to cultural knowledge, not a replacement. When used thoughtfully, it has the potential to restore lost histories, reconnect families, and bring visibility to communities that have often been overlooked or misunderstood. In 2025, a major scientific breakthrough changed how researchers understood one of the most common yet mysterious features of human biology: type O blood. For decades, its origins, particularly its overwhelming presence among indigenous populations in the Americas, remained an unsolved puzzle. While earlier studies had offered reasonable theories involving migration, isolation, and natural selection, none had fully explained how and why this blood type had come to dominate entire populations across such vast and diverse regions. The new research, conducted by a team of geneticists working with global data sets and advanced sequencing tools, revealed key differences in the ABO gene cluster that had previously gone undetected. These subtle genetic variations helped explain the way type O blood functions, how it interacts with the immune system, and why it appears to be more resistant to certain diseases. More importantly, the findings suggested that these genetic patterns weren't random. Instead, they pointed to an evolutionary advantage that helped early human groups survive in challenging conditions, particularly those faced by early populations in the Americas. This discovery didn't just add detail to a known story, it reframed the entire narrative. Rather than viewing type O blood as a simple quirk of population genetics or the result of long-term isolation, scientists began to see it as a sign of successful adaptation. In other words, the prevalence of type O blood in Native American communities may be more than a historical accident. It might reflect a strategic evolutionary response to the environments early peoples encountered as they spread across a new continent. One of the most compelling aspects of this research is how it connects biology with human history. The spread of type O blood likely began with small groups of people crossing from Siberia into North America during the last ice age. These groups, already carrying the type O gene, would have faced a variety of environmental challenges as they moved through unfamiliar landscapes, from freezing tundra to high mountain ranges and dense forests. The idea is that the genetic traits that helped them survive in those conditions were passed down through generations, eventually becoming the dominant genetic profile in many indigenous communities. The specific traits linked to type O blood go beyond just its compatibility in transfusions. Scientists found that individuals with this blood type may have had immune systems that responded more effectively to certain types of infections. Since type O lacks both A and B antigens, it may be less likely to trigger immune overreactions when encountering new pathogens. In early human societies where medicine was limited and exposure to disease could be fatal, even a slight difference in immune response could make a significant impact on survival and reproduction. The research also identified subtle biochemical characteristics in the blood itself. For example, type O blood may allow red blood cells to move more easily through the bloodstream. In areas with low oxygen levels, such as high-altitude regions, this could improve oxygen delivery throughout the body. Again, the advantage may have been small on a daily basis, but over time it could help explain why people with type O blood had better survival rates in certain regions. These findings have far-reaching implications beyond anthropology. In the field of medicine, understanding the unique characteristics of type O blood can help improve how doctors manage everything from emergency transfusions to infection control. The universal donor status of type O, particularly O negative, has always made it a critical resource for hospitals. Now, with more detailed genetic knowledge, health professionals can refine blood typing methods, reduce the risk of transfusion complications, and better prepare for shortages in times of crisis. There's also growing interest in how blood type might influence how individuals respond to different diseases and treatments. Studies have already shown that blood type may play a role in susceptibility to certain conditions, including heart disease, stomach ulcers, and viral infections. With a deeper understanding of the genetic variations behind type O, researchers can explore whether people with this blood type might benefit from personalized approaches to healthcare. This could include tailored vaccines, treatment plans, or nutritional advice based on blood chemistry. While the practical benefits of this research are important, the cultural and historical significance may be just as powerful. For many indigenous communities, the dominance of type O blood is more than just a scientific detail. It is a biological link to a shared past. It's a sign of continuity, resilience, and connection, passed down through generations as part of the collective story of a people. Now, with science confirming what many already suspected, there is a new opportunity to strengthen that narrative and build pride around an inherited trait that once raised more questions than answers. At the same time, the findings also highlight some of the challenges facing these communities today. Despite having high rates of a blood type that is critically important for emergency care, many indigenous regions face barriers when it comes to accessing healthcare. Remote locations, underfunded clinics, and low rates of blood donation can mean that the very blood that is most needed is not always available when it matters most. This creates a paradox. Indigenous populations may be rich in a life-saving biological resource, yet they often face the greatest difficulties in benefiting from it. Health experts argue that improving blood donation infrastructure, investing in mobile clinics, and building stronger healthcare partnerships could help close this gap. Increasing awareness about the unique value of type O blood in these communities could also lead to more targeted public health campaigns and medical support. Around the world, hospitals rely heavily on type O blood, especially during surgeries, trauma care, and natural disasters. It is in constant demand, and yet supply does not always meet the need. This issue isn't confined to indigenous areas, it's a global challenge. However, the concentration of type O blood in certain regions presents both a problem and an opportunity. With better planning and more inclusive systems, these communities could play a vital role in ensuring a more stable blood supply on a national or even international level. Another key takeaway from the 2025 research is how much is still hidden in our DNA. Even traits that seem well understood, like blood type, can carry layers of complexity that only become visible with the right tools and perspective. As science continues to unravel the human genome, we are likely to discover more of these hidden connections, genetic traits that shape not just our health, but our history, culture, and movement as a species. The story of type O blood reminds us that the human body is not just a collection of organs and cells. It is a record of survival, migration, and adaptation. The genes we inherit are shaped by the environments our ancestors lived in, the choices they made, and the communities they built. And when we study those genes carefully, we find stories that stretch across continents and generations. In the case of the Americas, this story began with people traveling across an icy land bridge, carrying with them a handful of genetic traits. One of those was the gene for type O blood. Over thousands of years, as these early settlers adapted to life in new lands, their blood type became more than just a biological feature. It became a symbol of endurance. Today, as we understand more about this blood type, we also gain insight into the broader human journey. From ancient migrations to modern medicine, from survival in harsh environments to cutting-edge genetic research, type O blood has quietly played a crucial role. It is not just a medical tool or a scientific curiosity, it is a thread running through the fabric of human history. As science continues to advance, the hope is that these discoveries will not only answer old questions, but also inspire new ones. What other secrets are hidden in our blood? How many traits have been passed down through generations, not just by chance, but by necessity? And how can we use this knowledge to build a healthier and more connected future? The story of type O blood may have started with a mystery, but today it offers a powerful example of how science, history, and identity come together. And perhaps most importantly, it shows us that our past is not just something to study. It's something that still lives within us, in every cell, every drop, and every heartbeat.